Well, good afternoon, fellow constitutionalists, and welcome to the Monday edition of the Dan Columbus Show, a Christian political talk show. This is episode 886. I'm your host, Dan Columbus, your constitutional warrior, fighting for your right just to be an American. It is September 18th, the year of our Lord 2017. Remember, we're a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control, and He does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in the beautiful central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. I'm having a little bit of issue with my one monitor. For some reason, the display adapter started showing the input not supported, so I went through and tried to change the display adapter, and it's not working. It still keeps putting up my display adapter is not working correctly. I don't know what happened. I tried to restart the computer a few times. I'm trying to find the one that actually works for it, and it's still not working right. Let me see if I can get things. I'm trying to get back to what I had on it, and maybe this is the one. I'm not sure. I do apologize for this, folks. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to do this at the last second, but it's one of those things that just didn't seem like it wanted to cooperate with me today. So I can't, for some reason, I can't even find my chat room in my, when I want to say this, I can't even find my chat room button on my, there it is, finally. Oh, I was trying to launch my chat. I have my chat done over at YouTube channel, so that's live, and I just wanted to try to get my chat up here and tell everybody at least good morning. If they don't know about the chat by now, I'm not sure about them. You know, if you've been listening to the show on Blog Talk Radio or on YouTube, you know that I have a chat room set up, and let me see if I can get it back up here. That looks not too bad, I guess, for the chat room. Oh my goodness! So it's me and Garfield on Mondays have a lot of problems sometimes. It's almost like I don't use the computer most of the weekend, and this weekend was worse than most. That I didn't use the computer because my fibromyalgia has been acting up all last week, and so I'm just let me stop that so we're not using so much computer up. Get the chat room up here. Like I said, it looks terrible. I can't even look at this monitor hardly. I'm going to try to get it fixed later on today, but I'm not sure if I'll get it done. I'm finding out, and I don't know if my, I had some updates over the weekend. I don't know if my display adapter on my computer, on my main computer, got updated, and it will not support the VGA cable and the resolution of my monitor. I got a 1080p monitor, and it doesn't support that. I'm like, well, I thought it was because it was looking good for a while, and come to find out, VGA does not support 1080p, at least the old cables. I got to get a super VGA cable to do that. I do have a DVI cable that would actually do it, but it's not long enough. It's not long enough. And then the monitor I got it on sale. I thought when I bought the monitor it had a HDMI input on it. Nope, didn't have an HDMI input on it. So I'm like, when it rains, it pours. So I ordered a couple of them, the VGA cables, and so I'm replacing all the smaller VGA cables because every one of my computers are set up for 1080p on the display cards. So I'm going to replace those on all three of my computers. That way I'm getting a pure 1080p signal. Although my two big monitors that are on my other computers are actually displaying 1080p with the older VGA cable, and I don't know if that's a thing of the card, which I'm told it is. Certain cards will actually do that, and I just wanted to check my other big computer here real quick. Yeah, because that's also on 1080p, so it's just my main monitor I'm looking at's 1080p, and then the second monitor hooked to that is hooked through VGA, and that is not. So I'm wondering if, because these two are on the main monitors, it's actually somehow getting around that limitation on the VGA. But anyway, we're here. The chat room is open in both the Blog Talk Radio and also in my YouTube channel. So belated Happy Constitution Day. Yesterday was the Constitution Day, September 17th. 230 years ago on yesterday, the framers of the Constitution signed the Constitution and sent it out for ratification. And this is the controlling document that they've given us that survived for 230 years. We are still, people say we're a unique experiment still in governance because the Constitution established a republic, and most new states and their original constitutions don't survive this long. We have gone almost 100 years further than most republics or democracies, which we are not a democracy, we are a republic. And some people over the weekend got really mad at me about that on Facebook and Twitter when I said that, and they come back, well, we're a type of democracy, and I typed back to them, no, we're not. Look up the term republic. We have some democratic processes in there, but we are not a democracy. We're not a type of democracy. We are a republic. We are an example of a constitutional representative republic, not a democracy. No matter how many times you want to say this, and this, to me, folks, this is a talking point that most of the folks out there, the anti-freedom folks out there in the mainstream media and in the Democrat Party, and if you notice, I do not call them the Democratic Party. They changed their name, the Democratic Party, which I thought was stupid. Honestly, I thought that was a what were they thinking moment, you know, almost like a palm slap in the face type moment. You know, they're taking an adjective and calling their party by an adjective, a Democratic Party. And I just refuse to use it. I do. It's just like with genders. I refuse to recognize that there's more than two genders. And I get a lot of static for that. You know, well, you're forcing my ideology on other folks. I said, no, I'm not. You can call yourself whatever you want. You can identify yourself by whatever gender you want to. Have at it. But don't force me to recognize that. And you can't force me to recognize that. I'm sorry. You know, it's okay if these relativists out there in the country, and they are relativists, and we're going to talk a little bit about this. The past couple days we talked about beware the ethical humanist and, ethical and moral relativity. I got a good article today about, we'll get into that a little bit after the after we talk about the Constitution a little bit. What's wrong with relativism? There's a whole lot of things that are wrong with relativism. And this is something that we have to address on the show here. This is one of these things I do. I address these things on the show. One of the latest things that we have, the news about my potential debate with Kimberly. She said she would debate. She wanted it, not by Skype, and I don't think she understands technology, and that's okay. Not a lot of people, not everybody does. And I emailed or I messaged back to her that, I use Skype for my interview on my live show. If I interview somebody, I have it set up where I can talk to them on Skype. People can hear them on, on YouTube and also on Blog Talk Radio at the same time while I'm doing all this. So I haven't heard back from her, and she wanted to debate every point. She says she disagrees with 95% of what I said about beware the ethical humanist, and I'm getting a little bit of feedback and static in here. I don't know what's going on. Testing 1 2 3. Anyway, and I put in 95% really with a question mark, and she does, and she actually doesn't like everything I say when it comes to ethical society, ethical humanist relative, humanistic relativity, ethical moral relativity, because I believe in a objective moral standard that I get from God's Word. The problem with relativists, especially the humanists out there, they reject that there is a God. So then where do we get our moral relativity? Or where do we get our objective morals from? They say it's through consensus of human experience. And I'm like, no, it can't be from human experience, because there are societies out there, and some of them have fallen by the wayside, like the Soviet Union, that was totally, there's no such thing as individualism. You will do what we say. You will conform to how we say. And if you read back through and listen to some of the things I've listened to from these ethical societies and moral relativists and these humanist folks out there, which I think you can lump them all together because a lot of their ideology is the same. It leads to socialism because they're collectivists and they rely on the experiences of other human beings, which my experiences in life may not be the best example for you to base your morality on. And I would beg to pose the question, I'd like to pose the question to folks, what about all these folks that are in prison for the rest of their lives and the moral choices they made? They're part of the society, still are, they just happen to be incarcerated, but their life circumstances, can you use those? Because there's a vast majority, they're not a vast majority, but there's a huge population in prisons. And that's part of the human experience. Can we use that to mold public opinion as far as their morals and their experiences? And I would say no, and hopefully I would hope that the humanists out there would say no also. But they're still part of the equation that you can't help but take into account. Just like the Constitution I titled the show today, Is the Constitution Still Relevant? It's part of an opinion piece that I took the title off of, but it's a good question, and I ask this all the time. Is the Constitution still relevant for today? And we're going to talk about that. One of the first things we're going to talk about, there's an opinion piece, Celebrate Our Constitution by Honoring Its Meaning, by Carol J. Azzoni from the mycentraljersey.com. And I remember actually delivering paper to these folks back when I was driving truck for Metropolitan Trucking. So I know of these people. And then we're going to talk about, is the Constitution relevant for today? And then after we get done with that, we're going to talk about what's wrong with relativism. Because there's a lot of things wrong with relativism. And in the short Bible lesson today, I'm going to read this one. It's very short, but this goes with what we're talking about today on the show. All right, folks. Are you the man of the house, or even the woman of the house, that actually does the repair work? I know some women that actually get down and dirty with the machinery in the house, like washers, dryers, some other things, and also know how to work on lawnmowers and some other power equipment. But I don't mean to direct this just to men, but because I know there are women out there. But are you the handy person, the handy man or handy woman of the house? And you need parts, and you can't either find them locally or you don't have time to go out and look at them. Go to the DanClementShow.com and click on the Sears Part Direct widget. It'll take you to their site, and in doing so, they're an affiliate marketer partner of mine. And in doing so, you'll be supporting the show monetarily doing that. It won't cost you a dime, doesn't cost you any extra. And if you go to the DanClementShow.com and click on the Sears Part Direct widget, there is an offer code there. You type in that number, and it gives you 10% off all lawn equipment and appliance parts and everything. I've used them. They're fantastic. I got the part. I had to pay a little extra to get the part in 2 days, and that's fine because our oven was out. We couldn't use our oven, and so that was worth it to me to get it there. And it got here in the 2 days. The part fit, and as a matter of fact, the part was actually better than the old part I took out. So it's a win-win everywhere. So if you're the handy man or woman of the house and you work on these things, now's the time to get this ordered so you can work on it before the weekend. So if it's a piece of power equipment for outside, you got it fixed and you can keep going and doing the work you need to do to get those lists. Either the husband has the honey-do list or the wife just has a list that she has that she wants to do outside. Okay, today's daily Bible reading comes from Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 through 10. For by grace you have been saved through faith, that not of yourself. It is a gift from God. So our salvation is a gift from God. Our salvation is a gift from Jesus Christ, okay? Not of works, lest anyone should boast. That means we can't work our way into salvation. No amount of good works that we do will earn us salvation. But listen to this next part, because this is where people take these verses out of context. Verse 10, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. Oh. Now we have to remember that we can't work our way into salvation. There's nothing I can do that will merit salvation. It's a free gift from God. He gives it to us freely through his son Jesus Christ by being baptized into Jesus Christ for the remission of sins. But He's created us in Christ Jesus for good works. Well, what are these good works that we're supposed to be doing? Preaching the gospel is one of them. That's a good work. We were created for that. We were created for that. Spreading the gospel, spreading the good news of the gospel. Benevolent works. Those in the household of faith, and then, first, take care of those first, and then those folks outside that need benevolent help. That's a good work. Now, if we do these good works, are we earning our way into heaven? No. That's already been taken care of. But God did prepare good works for us to do. Because Christ wasn't always going to be with us. So who preaches? I'm going to go back to the gospel. Who preaches the gospel? Christians preach the gospel. That's a good work. That's one of the works that God prepared for us to do, that He prepared beforehand. Before we were even become Christians, these works were prepared. So when we became a Christian, this is the work that God wants us to do. To me, that's a no-brainer. But a lot of folks out there leave verse 10 off. Oh, not of good works, lest anyone should boast. And a lot of folks think that baptism is a work. And if you do an actual study of baptism and all the places it's talked about and keep things in context, you'll see baptism is not a work. It's a requirement so you can have remission of sins. And go back real quick here, go back to Jesus' baptism by John the Baptist. What did Jesus tell John the Baptist? That I have to be baptized to fulfill all righteousness. Not that Christ needed remission of sins or forgiveness of any sins, but it was part of being right with God. And it's not a lot of denominations out there say it's a afterthought. You're saved before baptism. Baptism is just an outward showing of your obedience. No, there's nowhere in Scripture where that's the case, where people are saved before baptism. If you go through the book of Acts, you'll see that. Dave says, sounds good to me. He doesn't hear any static or anything. And he said, on the other hand, the hat, I have my Ohio State shirt on, and I have my Ohio State hat on. So, tough nuggies, Dave. The quote meal from today comes from Quentin J. Everest. When a person's faith seems to collapse without warning, and I emphasize that seems to collapse, one can be sure it has been the result of inner conflicts, the termites of disobedience. When a person's faith seems to collapse without warning, it never happens that way, folks. There's always signs for that. There's always signs for that. Today's daily Bible lesson comes from Apologetics Press and written by Dr. David Miller back in 2010. It's called The Fool. And it's very short, and I just want to read this to you because this has something to do with almost everything we're talking about, the Constitution, relativism, what we talked about last week. Perhaps many Americans are unaware of the extent to which atheism and agnosticism has blanketed the country. Virtually every department in our state, universities have been infiltrated with godless, humanistic presumptions. Study and research are conducted from an evolutionary relativistic framework that either jettisons the notion of God altogether or dilutes it sufficiently to effectively nullify the biblical representation of deity. The psalmist anticipated all such behaviors centuries ago when he wrote, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God." Psalms 14, verse 1, and chapter 53, or Psalm 53, verse 1. Because of their inability to discern spiritual things, 1 Corinthians 2:14, the Soviet cosmonaut looked out of their spacecraft in the 1960s in ridicule and asked, "Where is God?" Echoing again the words of the psalmist, who should the nation say, "Where now is their God?" But our God is in heaven. He does whatever he pleases. Psalms 115, verses 2 through 3. Pride is a deadly pitfall that blinds one to the truth. The wicked is in his proud countenance does not seek God. All his thoughts are, there is no God. Psalms 10:4. Like I said, I'm getting some crackling in my headphones. I don't know if it's a little static. Anyway, but the universe declares the plain work of the Creator, Psalms 19:1, which would who would not consider a person a fool were he to pick up a watch and proclaim, "There is no watchmaker"? Though he had never empirically encountered the creator and designer of the watch, the mere existence of the watch proves the existence of a watchmaker. It takes very little investigation to see that a watch is a crude, simplistic instrument compared to the glorious, complex chronometers of the universe. Those who see the things that are made and deny the very one who made it are all without excuse. Romans chapter 1, verse 20. Recognition of the existence of the Creator should lead a person to pursue His will. Talking about the Creator's will. One may express verbal belief in the existence of God while being a practical atheist. Such a person professes there is no God by his or her actions. By failing to devote to God, by failing to be devoted to God, even while considering oneself to be a Christian, he or she is denying the Lord. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8, 2 Timothy 3:5, and Titus 1:16. One can deny his great act of love, mercy, and grace. Titus 2:11 through 12, Hebrews 2:3. One can forget and ignore the great dissolution to come. 2 Peter 3:10 through 12. Who desires to be a fool? Who really wants to live a foolish existence? The wise, insightful, noble person is the one who exclaims the evidence and draws the warranted conclusion. Only a fool would affirm there is no God. And I've said this before on the show, and I'll say it again. Apologetics Press is a good place to go to look up what's called evidences in the Bible. As far as I know, in my research, the Bible is the only book from antiquity that has proof, that God actually put proof in His Word that He is who He says He is. You know, exclaiming in Isaiah, you know, the Holy Spirit, you know, breathed, prophesied to Isaiah that, you know, the sphere of the world. Well, how did Isaiah know that the world was round? You know, everybody back then were still flat earthers. How did he know? Because somebody told him. The washing with the hyssop and the ashes of a heifer, you know, the cleansing ritual in the temple and for the people. Modern medicine has found out that it had medicinal purposes. Oh. But how did the children of Israel know to put those combinations together for disinfecting and healing? They were told through inspiration. You know, the Bible's not a book of medicine, but everywhere it talks about like cleansing and stuff like that, modern medicine has found out that it's accurate. It's accurate, and what God had the children of Israel doing was good for them, make them healthy. When God talks about history, now the Bible is a history book in one sense, but when it talks about certain points in history, it's very accurate. Like the Hittites, up until 1946, archaeologists said the Bible's wrong. There is no Hittite nation. But lo and behold, 1946, they actually found the Hittite nation. You know, so the Bible puts these kernels of truth throughout the Bible to prove that God is who He says He is. And only the fool would look at that and say there is no God. They want to try to explain it away, but it can't be explained away. And as far as I know, in my research, and I could stand to be corrected, that the Bible is the only book from antiquity that talks about a religion. It talks about the Israelites and the Jewish religion, and also Christianity in the New Testament, and puts the evidence in there to confirm the Word, and to let mankind know that God is who He says He is. He's God. He's the creator of the heavens and the earth. So that's a good article, The Fool, by Dr. David Miller. Yeah, it sounds like a loose connection. It's coming up through. Yeah, I don't know what's going on here. I got. Let me undo my headphones. Maybe my headphones are causing it. Oh, hang on a second, folks. Aha, that's still in my That's still in my, my monitor. Hang on a second, folks. Oh. Yeah, that is popping through there, isn't it? I do apologize, folks. Do one more. I'm going to do one more thing here, folks, to try to see if this works or not. I have to put on my. I have to go back to my headphones. Maybe there's something wrong with my other headphones. I wonder if it's just the cable itself has a. I'm gonna leave my headphones on right now. That I don't think that's doing it. All right, Dave says it's so small it's not to interrupt. I'm gonna leave my my big phones on here, I guess, until I get into another section of this. I do apologize. Okay, now, is the Constitution relevant for today? Is the Constitution relevant? And that's a question. I think that's a huge question, and we've been talking about, folks that are relevant or not. If the relative moralism, if that's a thing or not. So, again, I'm not. Look, I'm not trying to condemn folks for doing, for believing what they believe. I'm putting forth an alternative explanation of things. And when I talk about these things, when I debate these things with folks, I try to do it with reason. I really, really do. And I know some people think I'm unreasonable, especially because I'm a Christian. I've been told I don't know how many times by folks on Facebook and Twitter that if you believe in God, you're not rational. If you believe in God, you're not rational. And folks, I take umbrage to that. I take umbrage to that because God has given us proof, rational proof that He exists. If you're willing to sit down and actually look and see that. When I explain the Constitution with folks, I explain it rationally. We can understand it. I have a 12th grade education. I graduated from high school. And I'm also a Rogue Scholar. I continued my education on my own. I pursued interests on my own. And this is something that I think colleges do a disservice to students by forcing them to go through classes in liberal arts that, in my opinion, really doesn't have anything to do with the real world, really doesn't prepare them for a job market, and I think it's just a waste of money. Now, I know why they do it, and I don't want to get down this rabbit hole too far. I know why they do this is because the only place some of these degrees that you get, like women's studies and some of these other very, very, far left liberal ideologies that are taught in college, the only place you can get a job is in college, being a professor teaching those actual things. They do not translate into the real world, at least not that I've seen. And again, I can stand to be corrected on this. I really can be. But when it comes to things like the Constitution, the framers were they were wordsmiths. They were very adamant about the words that they were using to frame the Constitution with. They did not want the meaning of the Constitution to be skewed. Now, what the problem is, and yesterday was the 17th September. This is when the framers of the Constitution signed the Constitution and sent it out to the colonies or the states actually at that time for ratification. So the Continental Congress came in, and this is what we have, and this is the document that's going to frame the federal government. And their original intent And Madison states it in the Federalist Papers, and other framers state this sentiment also, that this document was a limiting document. Therefore, anything written in that document is limiting also. Now, the anti-freedom crowd out there will tell you, no, 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 you can't do that. That's not what the Constitution is a living, breathing document. I can't tell you how many folks, back when I first started this show, back in 2008, when President Obama was running for office, and then when he became president, that I got in discussions like Lamont in Chicago. I don't know if that's his name or not, that's just his avatar. But I got discussions with him, and he said, that's why we elect presidents, in order to do the people's will. And I said, but they have to do that inside the constraints of the Constitution. And most anti-freedom folks out there will tell you that the Constitution is antiquated and irrelevant for today. And I've discussed it and debated it with folks, and their reasoning is not sound in how they think that the Constitution is living and breathing, because they think, and this happened in 2008, mainly in 2008 with me anyway. I didn't get this much slack in 2012 when President Obama was elected for a second term. So it was in 2008. A lot of folks out there was Twitter feeds, there was Facebook postings and everything, that this is how they thought and felt, that since we elected President Obama, that he can change things for the better, including the Constitution, with just by passing laws. And you can't do that. That is unacceptable to the extreme. That is totally unacceptable in the extreme, because the founding fathers did not set up a dictatorship. And for lack of a better term, that's exactly how President Obama was acting during his eight years in office. Him and his acolytes and those in the Democrat Party and the anti-freedom folks out there in the lamestream media were acting like that he was a king or a dictator, that he could, and he said this after the 2012 election when he got reelected, especially with the DACA. He says, I have a pen and a phone. I'll just sign an executive order and we'll make this law. That is totally unconstitutional, because my Constitution reads in Article 1 that all legislative powers are vested in a Congress. Nowhere does it say that legislative powers are vested in the executive branch. You'll not find that in the Constitution. And this is why a lot of folks today think that the Constitution is irrelevant, because it's antiquated. They've bought into this lie that the Constitution is antiquated, and this is the same lie that folks use on the Bible. Well, this thing's 2,000 years old. How in the world can that be relevant for today? Well, I don't know. What about the golden rule? Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. The second greatest commandment that Christ told that scribe was love your neighbor as yourself. Aren't those relevant for today? Aren't those rules to live by? You know, Christ said you pray for your enemies. You don't tit for tat on enemies. You pray for them. You pray for your enemies. That's a radical idea, but why isn't that relevant for today? When I pray to God, not every time I pray to God, but a lot of times when I pray to God, I pray for peace. I pray that somehow that the supposed enemies of the United States, we can sit down and have a peaceful resolution to the problems that may or may not exist. Maybe only in the minds of the leaders of the state, but it seems like there's a whole lot of turmoil going on in the world today that I think prayer would actually be beneficial for the world, that if we just prayed a little more about having world peace. But getting back to the Constitution, a lot of folks today are under the misconception that the U.S. Constitution is not relevant for today. And that is because for the past almost 100 years now, we have been living in what we call the progressive era, and I call it the progressive error because it's a mistake, that progressives, anti-freedom folks in this country, have been planning this idea that we can just change the Constitution nilly-willy. It doesn't matter. It does not hold the restraints that people think it holds, that we have to have this presidential legislative power through executive action. We have to be able to change the Constitution through a simple law going through Congress and being signed into law by the President of the United States. Because they don't want to put the work in to change the Constitution constitutionally through Article 5. Either an amendment goes through and is approved by Congress and sent out for ratification, or as they're trying to do right now, a convention of the states that does the same thing, proposes amendments to the Constitution and sends them out for 3/4 of the states to ratify. And no, it's not a con-con. I'm not going to get into that. Conventions of the states are not con-cons. So, yesterday was Constitution Day, and hopefully people were thinking about this. I don't know if they were or not. My ardent prayer is that they were thinking about this. That the founders put in chains, put in a box what the federal government was supposed to do. They didn't enumerate everything it wasn't supposed to do. And this is, folks, I know people just, they grate their teeth when I say this. This is exactly how the Bible, especially the New Testament, and, well, the Old Testament, but we're under the Christian dispensation. We are governed by what God tells us to do. And if God didn't tell us we could do this, take the Lord's Supper, fruit of the vine, unleavened bread. I cannot, because I like chocolate cake with chocolate icing, I cannot substitute the bread with chocolate cake. Just because God didn't say I couldn't, doesn't mean I can. You see what I'm saying? God specifically said, Jesus Christ set the example on what we call the Last Supper with taking unleavened bread and the fruit of the vine. The bread representing his body, the fruit of the vine representing his blood that he shed on the cross for our sins. We have a direct example of how that's to happen. Paul tells the Corinthians also again, over in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, the same thing. The Bible, we are governed in the Bible, if you want to say this, by the things that we are allowed to do. God didn't go through and make a list of everything we couldn't do, that we never get through the book. God, in the same way with the Jews in the Old Testament, God laid out a specific list of how the priests were to dress, how the tabernacle before the temple was set up, the duties and how they were to perform these duties. And he laid out these very descriptive, complete list of how they were to do these things. And if they went beyond that, then they were in huge trouble. And it happened time and time again. Every time Aaron's 2 sons brought strange fire for the incense, boom, they were gone. Because they disobeyed God. God was very specific about the type of wood that was used for the fire, for the incense and the burnt offering. So, and again, like I said, it drives people nuts. It drives people nuts that I compare that. But it's the same principle. And we had, folks, believe it or not, most, if not all, the founding fathers and the framers were God-fearing men. Now, were there different levels of their devotion to God and their understanding of God? Absolutely. We have that today also. But they took this example out of not only the Bible, but other documents throughout history. Chris Ann Hall does a very good job explaining the history of the Constitution from 1100 AD up to when the Constitution was created. The founding fathers were students of history, and they were students of other governments, trying to figure out how to frame a government, a federal government that would protect the rights, the God-given rights that the people already had before the government, and also be able to run the government and do some things that the states by themselves could not do, like defend the continent. So they had to give that power to the federal government to be able to put up an army, a navy, any way they could do to defend this country. I think the United States have gone on beyond that defense and used excuses like Senator John McCain said, well, we've got to fight him over there so we don't have to fight him here. And there's a lot of times, I think, in the past that we were fighting them over there when we didn't need to be fighting them over there, but that's another story. That's another story. So, is the Constitution still relevant? Is the Constitution still relevant? This is by Robert Perry over at Constitution News, or Consortium, excuse me, Consortium News. And he writes, there are two major schools of thought about the U.S. Constitution. One from the left argues that it's an outdated structure that should not be allowed to inhibit actions necessary to meet the needs of modern society. And one from the right, and you know me, I got rid of the left-right paradigm, folks. It's either freedom or anti-freedom. I think that's a better way to look at things. But anyway, I'll go with what Mr. Perry said here. And there's one from the right that's only a strict constructionist reading of the Constitution, and respect for the framers' original intent should be allowed. But the problem with these two views is that neither is logically consistent or honest. The left, for instance, embraces important constitutional liberties such as habeas corpus, freedom of speech, prohibitions against cruel and unusual punishment, unreasonable searches and seizures regardless of the exigencies of the moment. Yet, the left disdains much of the Constitution for its anti-democratic and even immoral compromises which enabled the new governing document to emerge from the Constitutional Convention in 1787 and narrowly win ratification in 1788. Not only did the Constitution countenance slavery, which that's wrong, folks, I'll explain that real quick why, it undercut democracy by giving 2 senators to each state regardless of population, and originally have them appointed by state legislators, not elected by the people. Now, the reason why I am reading this is because Mr. Perry gets this wrong. First off, the Founding Fathers did make a compromise, but what the senator, or what the representatives, the constitutional representatives, the state delegates that were sent to the Constitutional Convention, what they didn't understand was the 3/5 compromise. Now, the folks that were slave owners thought that the 3/5 compromise said that the slaves were only 3/5 of a human. And that was not the case at all. If you go back and read why that was put in there and the thoughts behind that, for representation purposes only, you can only count slaves as 3/5 of a person, because if they were counted as a full vote, which slaves were definitely not represented in Congress the whole time we had slavery in here since the Constitution was signed, this limited the ability of the Southern slave owners to have a bigger stake, representative-wise, from in the House of Representatives in Congress. It limited that effect. And that was the beginning of the end for slavery in the United States in the Constitution. So Mr. Perry actually gets that wrong. And the other thing he talks about, not only did the Constitution countenance slavery, it undercut democracy by giving 2 senators to each state regardless of population. We are not a democracy. I can't emphasize that enough. We are a republic, a representative republic. And if Mr. Perry would understand why the Founding Fathers did what they did, having a bicameral Congress, a House of Representatives for the people, that we have direct I live in a congressional district that I have a representative right now, Lou Barletta, in the House of Representatives. And the original intent was that the states would have 2 senators each, they'd call that the higher house, that the states could control. And that was a check and balance on the federal government. That is that's how representative countries, that's how a representative government, a republic, that's how it's designed. That there's checks and balances all over the place. In 1913, we not only got the Federal Reserve Charter, but we also got the 16th Amendment, which allowed Congress to lay income tax on individuals, which was not in the Constitution before, and it became constitutional with that. And I think that was very unwise to do. But I think the worst one was the 17th Amendment that made the senators directly responsible to the people. We already had representatives in Congress, folks. We had the House of Representatives. This took the ability of the states away, took away the ability of the states to put a check on the federal government. Mr. Perry goes on, why ask many on the left, should modern American society be restricted to the judgments of a small group of proprietied white men, many of them slaveholders who died 2 centuries ago? Why should old compromises, which now seem ridiculously quaint and wrong-headed, be allowed to distort and constrain democratic judgments in 2013. A Georgetown University constitutional law professor, Louis Michael Seidman, wrote in a recent New York Times op-ed, much of the fault behind today's gridlock in Washington can be traced to the archaic, idiosyncratic, and downright evil provisions of the U.S. Constitution, he added. Our obsession with the Constitution has saddled us with a dysfunctional political system, kept us from debating the merits of divisive issues, and inflamed our public discourse. Instead of arguing about what is to be done, we argue about what James Madison might have wanted 225 years ago. The right's distortions, and I want to get through this article here. While the left tends to view the Constitution as an irrevocably flawed document, albeit with individual liberties that the left loves, the right has made political hay by presenting itself as the Constitution's true defenders. The right argues for what it calls strict construction and original intent. I believe today that the right has left this, especially in the Republican Party. They have left this ideology, and that's their problem today. They're not strict constructionists. I'm a strict constructionist, but they're not. Yet even right-wing Supreme Court justices who wax eloquently about originalism will twist the framers' words and intentions when ideologically convenient, such as when Antonin Scalia inserted restrictions in the Commerce Clause during his opposition to the Affordable Care Act, although James Madison and the framers left the congressional power to regulate interstate and national commerce unlimited. This is one of the things, the Commerce Clause is an enumerated power for Congress. But, and this is the thing, they're only to make sure that commerce is regular between the states, not regulated. And the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, was trying to regulate commerce between the states, trying to restrict it in some respects. And the Republicans didn't do anything about it. A lot of Republicans don't adhere to the Commerce Clause anyway. They want to use the power of the government when they have the levers of power, and when the Democrats, and those are the two major parties, when they have the levers of power, even though they might do some things right, they might, get constitutionally some things right, because they're in the opposite party, the Republicans buck and just resent this. Now, indeed, from a strict reading of the Constitution, Madison had a much more robust respect for the democratic decisions of the elected branches of government than does today's right. And I would have to add the left also. In oral arguments on Obamacare in 2012, Scalia fretted about the possibility that Congress might use the Commerce Clause to mandate compulsory broccoli purchases, but Madison seemed to understand that if Congress and the president were nutty enough to do something like that, the voters would have the common sense to unelect those representatives at the next opportunity. However, rather than trusting in Madison's language giving Congress the unlimited power to regulate commerce, which it doesn't, it's to make commerce regular, Scalia insisted on second-guessing the framers by applying his own judgments about what limitations should be in the Commerce Clause. Scalia's constitutional rewrite was accepted by his fellow right-wingers, including Chief Justice John Roberts, although at the last minute Roberts joined the 4 Democrat justices to deem the Affordable Care Act constitutional under the taxing power of Congress. Still, Roberts rejected the Commerce Clause as justification after he arbitrarily eliminated some 18th century definitions of the word regulate. And this is what happens. They define words in today's terminology, what they mean today, instead of going back and see what they meant back when the Constitution was actually written. That's why I have linked to a copy of the 1828 Merriam-Webster Dictionary. So I know what they say when they talk about the word regulate. It's actually make it regular is exactly what that clause means in there, the Commerce Clause. In other words, Scalia and Roberts played games with the Constitution to make it fit their political biases. They really didn't give a hoot about strict construction. Now, from reading this guy's article here, I can tell this guy doesn't have a clue about the Constitution. Not a clue about the Constitution. This is why I'm reading this. And this is why this is important to understand these things. He says, similarly, When Scalia and 4 other Republican justices wanted George W. Bush in the White House, they suddenly discerned in the 14th Amendment's demand for equal protection of the law and an original intent to ensure Bush's Florida victory in election 2000 through the amendment, though the amendment was adopted after the Civil War to protect the rights of former black slaves, not white plutocrats. Well, if it's equal protection under the law in the 14th Amendment, and yes, it was a post-Civil War amendment, doesn't that still apply today? That we all should have equal protection under the law? What was happening, if you don't remember, in 2000, the hanging chads down on the election ballots in Florida, and they ruled, the commission ruled in favor of Bush, and there was a big brouhaha about, some were saying it was Bush, some were saying it was still Al Gore's election, and they eventually had to work up to the Supreme Court. And all the Supreme Court did was stop the cases, and in stopping the cases, they declared President Bush the winner, because he had originally had in Florida, if you go back and read this, he originally had the win in Florida, but Al Gore challenged it because of these hanging chads. And I'm glad we don't have that system anymore. But you can see here where this guy just really does not like the Constitution at all. I just want to get down to this other part here because I'm winding down here. He says, changing reality. That the modern American right twists historic reality, I suppose, should not come as a shock. After all, today's right has organized itself around propaganda regarding current events, from talk radio to Fox News to ideological think tanks. So why should anyone expect any different about how the right would deal with history? The right also understands that national mythology is a powerful force, very effective in manipulating Americans into believing that they are standing with the founders, even if the history has to be falsified to achieve that emotional response. Many Tea Partiers, it seems, will eagerly eat up a stew of bad history served up by the likes of Glenn Beck. And here they go back, oh, they follow Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck was saying this stuff, so they're all followers of Glenn Beck. Folks, I'm telling you right now that even back in Glenn Beck's heyday during 9/12 and you know, the 9/12 movement and the Tea Party movements, these folks were not relying on Glenn Beck for their history. I'm sorry to tell this guy. I wasn't relying on Glenn Beck. I've always thought he was somewhat of a kook, and he's proved himself a kook over the years to me. He really has. So again, this guy's very anti-freedom, as it were. Thus, we have key characters of that early history effectively expunged, such as the disastrous reign of the Articles of Confederation from 1777 to 87. The Articles declared the 13 states sovereign and independent, with the central government just a league of friendship with little power. Because the original structure of the United States was lurching towards collapse by 1787, with a major revolt erupting in Western Massachusetts, the Shays Rebellion, and European powers plotting how to exploit divisions between the states and regions. General George Washington in particular worried that the hard-won independence of the new country was in jeopardy. And he was right to worry about that, folks. So to understand what Washington, Madison, and other key framers were trying to do with the Constitution, you must first read the Articles of Confederation, i.e., what prompted the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, 1787. Washington and Madison were so determined to correct the flaws of the Articles that they defied their instructions, which were to propose some changes to the Articles. Instead, they threw out the old system. Now, this is another fallacy. Yes, they were trying to fix the Articles, and they decided that they couldn't fix the Articles. But what a lot of these revisionist historians like Mr. Perry do is they leave out the fact that they went back to their state houses. They didn't just throw out the Articles of Confederation on their own will. They went back to their state house and said, look, we are at an impasse to correct the Articles of Confederation. These are our recommendations. Then the delegates at the different state houses debated and decided, yes, you know what, the Articles of Confederation are not working for us. Let's replace them and make a new government. These folks, these revisionist historians, think that the framers of the Constitution and the founders who were supporting them and having all these debates about it were just rogue delegates that just did this on their own. They just had a constitutional convention to scrap the Articles of Confederation, which was not true, not in the least bit. Go back and look and do your own homework and research what these delegates were instructed were instructed by their state houses. Matter of fact, if you go back and look at the movie John Adams and go back and look at the transcripts, during the ratification of the Declaration of Independence, New York could not vote in the affirmative because they did not get direction from their delegates, their House of Delegates or their state representatives. So, New York had to abstain. Now, does that look like they were runaway delegates there that were doing their own will to bring forth this Constitution? Folks, these guys just irk me to no end. Now, this whole week is Constitution Week, so we're going to pick up where with this revised narrative, and we're going to talk about tomorrow about celebrate our Constitution by honoring its meaning. And we're going to go over some more things throughout the week about the Constitution, about the Bill of Rights, but I just wanted to bring this out. Now, this gentleman, Mr. Perry, is, in all intents and purposes, is a relativist, because he wants the Constitution to be relative for today, and he doesn't see how it is. He doesn't see how, and this is where the ethical humanists and the humanists themselves and anybody that believes in relativism, this is where they fall down in the job, because what the Founding Fathers did was they recognized the sovereignty of the individual and organized the country. A lot of states, and even in the Constitution guarantees the states a republican form of government. That means like a republic in the states. They guarantee that. And in a republic, in this constitutional representative republic, the individuals collectively are sovereign over the state and over the federal government. They have come first. They created the states out of the colonies, and the states got together in the Constitution and created the federal government. And what relativists don't realize today, especially when it comes to the Constitution and morals and everything like that, is they left a lot of these moral decisions up to the individuals. The government's only supposed to protect the individual's rights. Matter of fact, the Ninth Amendment to the Bill of Rights says that this list, the Bill of Rights, is not an exhaustive list of the people's rights. And all the government's to do is to protect them, not enumerate them, not say you can exercise this one and not exercise this other one. And this is what's, folks, this is what's fantastic about our Constitution, about the Bill of Rights and about our rights in general. And we're going to pick up where we left off today with this revised narrative. This has been the Dan Clements Show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior. Remember, if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. Have a great rest of the day, folks, and God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow at noon.